The vast hall of the Galactic Council hummed with the soft blue glow of countless data streams. Velthor, a tall alien with 6 eyes arranged in a perfect circle around his head, sat hunched over his workstation. His tentacle-like fingers danced across the holographic interface as he reviewed quarterly survival reports from across the galaxy for the past 300 years. These reports had been boringly predictable. The Cathara, with their gleaming cities and advanced technology, always maintained a solid 94% survival rate. When disasters struck their worlds, they simply activated their planetary shields or teleported their populations to safety.
Oh.
Those fierce warrior people with their massive battle fleets consistently hit 89% survival through sheer military power. They fought every threat head-on, blasting asteroids from the sky and crushing hostile invaders beneath their boots. Even the peaceful Zephyrians, who looked like walking flowers, managed a respectable 91% by working together as a hive mind. When one knew danger was coming, they all knew. Simple, logical, predictable. But then Velthor's eyes focused on a data point that made his blood turn cold. There, glowing like a beacon in the middle of his display, was an entry that shouldn't exist. The humans from the small blue planet called Earth were showing a 99.7% survival rate across every conceivable disaster scenario. Velthar blinked all 6 eyes in sequence, a sign of deep confusion in his species. He ran the calculations again, then a third time. The numbers didn't change. These humans, who had barely figured out faster-than-light travel, were somehow surviving disasters that wiped out entire civilizations. He pulled up specific reports from human colonies scattered across the galaxy. On Kepler 44b, a rocky world where humans had built their first major settlement. The colony leader was a young man named Jinwu. According to the files, Jinwu had guided his people through 3 separate extinctional events in just the past year. First came the plasma storms that should have fried every electronic device on the planet. Somehow, the humans had not only survived, but used the storm's energy to power their cities for months afterward. Then a plague swept through their settlement, a disease that had killed billions on other worlds. Within weeks, the humans had turned it into a beneficial symbiotic organism that improved their immune systems. Most recently, hostile alien species had attacked their colony with enough firepower to level mountains. The humans had responded by befriending them. The attackers were now apparently working in the colony's gardens and had learned to play something called poker. Velthor's head tentacles twitched with nervous energy as he scrolled through report after report. Every human colony showed the same impossible pattern. They didn't just survive disasters, they seemed to thrive because of them. They turned problems into opportunities, enemies into friends, and certain death into what they called character-building experiences. The sound of heavy footsteps echoed through the chamber as General Dextrum approached. The massive Draconer military commander stood nearly 10 feet tall, his crystalline exoskeleton gleaming under the chamber's lights. His forearms ended in sharp claws that could slice through steel, and his deep voice carried the authority of someone who had conquered a dozen worlds. Velthor the general rumbled, "Your expression suggests either deep thought or severe indigestion. Which crisis are we facing today?" Velthor gestured toward his display with one trembling tentacle. "General, I need you to review these survival statistics. The humans, their numbers are impossible." General Zexrim's red eyes narrowed as he studied the data. After a long moment, he dismissed the report with a casual wave of his crystalline appendage. A statistical error, nothing more. No primitive species achieves such numbers. These humans still use chemical rockets, for crying out loud. They haven't even mastered dimensional travel or quantum manipulation. But General Velthar protested. "I've verified the data 17 times. Our survival rate is consistent across every colony, every disaster type. Every file it under data corruption and move on," the general interrupted. "I have real military threats to worry about. The Void Reapers are mobilizing near the Andromeda border, and the Hive Queens are expanding their territory again. I don't have time for clerical errors about some backwater species." As the general's footsteps faded into the distance, Velthor remained at his station, staring at the impossible numbers. Deep in his analytical mind, he couldn't shake the feeling that something unprecedented was happening in the human sectors of space. Something that would change everything they thought they knew about survival, adaptation, and what it meant to be truly alive in a universe that seemed determined to kill everything in it. 3 months had passed since Veltor first discovered the impossible human survival statistics. The Galactic Council, still skeptical of his findings, decided to conduct a proper observation test. They chose the human research station orbiting Proxima Centauri b, a small outpost with only 43 inhabitants. Perfect for a controlled experiment, the test would come naturally. Space weather monitors had detected a massive Category 5 solar storm heading directly toward the station. These storms were planet killers, capable of frying every electronic system within a light-year radius. Most civilizations would evacuate immediately, abandoning their settlements to save lives. The few who stayed usually ended up as charred remains floating in space. A team of alien observers positioned themselves at a safe distance, their advanced recording equipment trained on the human station. Observer Clixta, a jellyfish-like creature with translucent skin and dozens of floating sensory organs, floated near the main viewing screen. His species had witnessed the death of 3 colonies during similar storms. He expected to document another tragedy. Storm impact in 6 hours, announced the monitoring system. Human station directly in the path. Evacuation protocols should have begun 4 hours ago, but the humans weren't evacuating. Instead, the station's communication array crackled to life, and a calm voice filled the observation ship. "All right, people," said Minho, the station's chief engineer. His voice carried the relaxed tone of someone discussing weekend plans rather than facing certain death. "We've got about 6 hours before this storm hits. Time to get creative." The observers watched in amazement as the humans didn't panic or pray to their gods. Instead, they began moving with purposeful energy throughout the station. Minho's voice continued over the intercom, assigning tasks with casual efficiency. "Soyen, I need you to reroute power through the secondary grid. Bypass the main systems and run everything through the backup generators." Jaeon grabbed the welding equipment and started attaching those metal plates to the outer hull. "Don't worry about making it look pretty function over form right now." Observer Clixta, as sensory organs quivered with confusion. "They're not evacuating. They're building something." The humans scattered throughout the station like worker ants, but their actions seemed chaotic and random. Some were stripping metal panels from interior walls. Others were disconnecting what appeared to be recreational equipment. A small group had surrounded their food preparation area, dismantling what the observers recognized as beverage-making devices. Are they taking apart their coffee makers?" whispered another observer. Engineer Soyen, a young woman with grease-stained coveralls, was rewiring electrical systems with lightning speed. She worked without blueprints or computer assistance, trusting some inner understanding of how the station's power grid functioned. Meanwhile, Jaeon was wielding metal plates to the outer hull in patterns that made no logical sense to the watching aliens. But the most confusing sight was a group of humans dismantling what appeared to be a recreational gaming console. Device was clearly designed for entertainment, yet they were carefully removing its components and connecting them to the station's power systems. "Did they just weaponize their entertainment system?" Clixta whispered, his voice filled with disbelief. The next few hours unfolded like a fever dream. The humans worked without sleep, fueled by endless cups of coffee and what they called determination. They connected metal plates to gaming console circuits, linked coffee makers to power generators, and somehow turned their entire station into a massive, jury-rigged electromagnetic shield. When the solar storm finally hit, the observers expected to witness the humans' destruction. Instead, they watched in stunned silence as the makeshift shield not only protected the station but actually absorbed the storm's energy. The system began glowing with captured power, channeling the storm's fury into useful electricity. "Impossible," breathed Clixta. "They're not just surviving. They're harvesting the storm." The humans had turned a planet-killing disaster into a power source. Their communications array, boosted by the excess energy, began broadcasting 3 times stronger than before. Other human colonies across the sector started receiving crystal clear signals from the station. When the storm finally passed, Minho's voice crackled over the communication array once more. His tone was exactly as calm and casual as when the crisis began. "Well, that was interesting," he said, as if he'd just finished a mildly challenging puzzle. "The storm gave us some ideas about improving our power systems, requesting permission to replicate this effect artificially. Also, can someone send more coffee? We're running low." The alien observers sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they'd witnessed. The humans hadn't just survived an extinction-level event, they'd turned it into a learning experience and a power upgrade. And their biggest concern afterward was coffee supplies. Klix, single quotes to, began composing his report to the council.
Ow.
Knowing that no one would believe what he'd seen without video evidence, the humans had done something that defied every law of survival and common sense. They'd looked at certain death and decided to make friends with it instead. The Galactic Council. Chambers buzzed with heated debate following the Proxima Centauri incident. Half the members insisted the solar storm survival was a lucky accident, while others demanded immediate investigation. Velther, now promoted to head of human monitoring, proposed a comprehensive observation program. "We need more data," he argued, his 6 eyes spinning nervously. "One incident proves nothing. Let's observe multiple human colonies facing different types of disasters." The council approved escalated monitoring protocols. Over the following months, they watched human settlements across the galaxy encounter every conceivable crisis. Observation team expected to finally witness normal species behavior, panic, evacuation, or extinction. Instead, they documented the same impossible pattern repeating everywhere. The first major test came on the mining world of Tau Ceti, where 2,000 humans had built a thriving colony extracting rare minerals from the planet's crystal caves. The world was harsh but manageable, with breathable atmosphere and decent gravity. Life was good until the plague arrived. It started with a single miner, named Kyung-min, who developed strange purple spots on his skin. Within hours, the infection spread through the colony like wildfire. The disease was unlike anything in Galactic medical databases. It attacked nervous systems, broke down cellular walls, and caused victims to lose motor control before falling into comas. The alien observers positioned themselves in orbit, expecting to document another tragic extinction. Similar plagues had wiped out entire civilizations in the past. The standard response was immediate quarantine followed by planetary evacuation. Any species that stayed usually died within weeks. But Colony Administrator Hyjin didn't order evacuation. Instead, she gathered her people in the main assembly hall, her voice steady despite the crisis unfolding around them. "Right, everyone," she announced. "We have a problem, but we also have an opportunity. This plague isn't just random, it's showing patterns. I'm organizing research teams to figure out what we're dealing with." The watching aliens couldn't believe what they were seeing. Instead of fleeing in terror, the humans were treating the plague like a scientific puzzle. Hyjin divided her colonists into specialized groups: medical teams to study the disease, ecological teams to examine its effects on local wildlife, and engineering teams to modify their equipment for research purposes. Dr. Seojin, the colony's chief medical officer, led the investigation with infectious enthusiasm. While his colleagues on other worlds would have focused solely on finding a cure, Seojin approached the plague with curiosity rather than fear. "Look at this," he announced during a colony-wide briefing, his eyes bright with discovery. "It isn't just affecting us, it's also targeting the local ecosystem. Plants, animals, even the native fungi. But here's the interesting part." He projected holographic images showing microscopic views of infected organisms. "The plague isn't trying to kill everything, it's creating connections. Look at these neural pathways forming between different species. It's like the plague is trying to build some kind of biological network." The humans began working around the clock, not to escape the plague, but to understand it. They studied infected animals, analyzed soil samples, and even volunteered to be test subjects for their own experiments. Their approach was methodical yet fearless, treating the potentially deadly disease as a fascinating research opportunity. Dr. Sayajan made the breakthrough discovery 3 weeks into the outbreak. The plague organisms are forming a symbiotic relationship with the native fungi, he reported excitedly. They're not parasites. They're trying to create a planetary communication system. The fungi act as data storage, while the plague organisms serve as biological processors. Instead of fighting the plague, the humans began working with it. They developed ways to guide the symbiotic process, helping the organisms form beneficial rather than harmful connections. Within a month, colonists who had been infected were showing enhanced immune systems, improved cognitive function, and even the ability to communicate with the planet's ecosystem. The transformation was remarkable. Infected humans could sense changes in weather patterns through the fungal network, predict seismic activity, and even communicate with local wildlife. The plague had evolved from a deadly disease into a biological internet connecting all life on the planet. By the second month, the colony wasn't just surviving, it was thriving. Humans had established a pharmaceutical research center developing medicines that other species paid enormous sums to obtain. The plague organisms, now domesticated and cooperative, helped create treatments for diseases that had plagued the galaxy for centuries. The alien observers watched in stunned silence as human supply ships arrived not for evacuation, but for expansion. Other human colonies were requesting permission to be deliberately infected with the beneficial plague. To gain access to the biological network, Hygien's quarterly report to Earth Command was typical of human understatement. Colony status: excellent population, growing. The plague situation has been resolved successfully. Request approval to expand operations and establish a medical research facility. Also, the plague organisms have developed individual personalities and want to negotiate a formal treaty regarding working conditions and vacation time. The watching aliens struggled to process what they'd witnessed. The humans had faced extinction, and somehow convinced death itself to become their business partner. Even more disturbing, they seemed to genuinely enjoy the process, treating each crisis as an exciting adventure rather than a threat to their existence. Observer Clicksta filed his report with trembling appendages, knowing that the council would demand even more extreme tests. Humans weren't just surviving impossible situations, they were transforming them into opportunities for growth and profit. General Vextrom had witnessed enough impossible human victories to question his own sanity. The crystalline warrior, veteran of 100 battles across the galaxy, stood in his command ship's war room studying tactical displays. His red eyes burned with frustration as he reviewed the latest reports from human colonies. "Enough," he growled, his forearms slamming against the metal table. "These humans cannot possibly be as capable as the reports suggest. They are primitive species that still uses chemical propulsion and celebrates by consuming fermented plant matter. I will test their combat abilities myself." The general's aide, a younger Draconer named Velkix, shifted nervously. "Council hasn't authorized direct military engagement with human settlements. They're technically our allies." "This isn't an attack," Vextrom replied, his voice carrying the cold authority of someone who had conquered 17 worlds. "This is a training exercise, demonstration of proper military protocol. We'll issue a standard ultimatum. They'll surrender or evacuate. We'll finally have proof that their survival statistics are meaningless against real military power." The general selected Wolf 359 as his target, a human mining colony with barely 300 inhabitants. The settlement had no military installations, no planetary defenses, and no escape routes. It was perfect for demonstrating the superiority of Draconer tactical doctrine. His war fleet, consisting of 12 battle cruisers and 40 fighter squadrons, approached the small human station like a metal storm. The ship's hulls gleamed with energy weapons capable of cracking planets, while their shields could deflect the firepower of entire armadas. Against a handful of human miners, it would be like using a star destroyer to swat a fly. "Open communication channels," Vextrom commanded. "Let's get this over with quickly." The main screen flickered to life, showing the interior of the human colony's command center. A young man in work clothes and safety gear looked up from a computer terminal, his expression remarkably calm for someone facing imminent destruction. "This is Defense Coordinator Dong-Wu," the human said, his voice steady and conversational. "I'm assuming you're here for the military exercise we heard about." "Welcome to Wolf 359, General Dextrum," blinked his red eyes in confusion. And the humans had somehow known about his training exercise before he'd even announced it. Human settlement. "This is General Dextrum of the Draconer Third Fleet. You have 1 hour to evacuate this system or face the consequences of resisting superior military force." Dong-Wu nodded thoughtfully, as if the general had just announced the weather forecast. "Understood. Let me get my team ready." He turned to address his colleagues with the same casual tone. "Yeah. Prep the emergency protocols. Taeyang, how's our oxygen recycling system running?" A young woman at a nearby console called back. "Running at 120% efficiency, sir. We could probably flood the entire station with pure oxygen if needed." "Perfect," Dong-Wu replied. "And Jiwan, are the mining charges still in storage?" "All accounted for, sir. We've got enough explosives to level a mountain," as General Vexrim watched. This exchange with growing bewilderment. The humans weren't evacuating or preparing to surrender. Instead, they were having what sounded like a normal work conversation. Even more disturbing, they seemed genuinely pleased about the situation. "Begin the demonstration," the general ordered his fleet. What followed would haunt Draconer military academies for generations. The humans didn't respond with conventional weapons or defensive systems. Instead, they began implementing what could only be described as weaponized creativity. First, they turned their life support system into a massive flamethrower, venting superheated oxygen through the station's docking ports. Draconer, fighters approaching for boarding actions, found themselves flying through clouds of combustible gas that ignited on contact with their engine exhaust. Then came the mining equipment. The humans had somehow converted their industrial tools into improvised artillery. Asteroid processing units became railguns, launching chunks of refined metal at velocities that punched through military-grade armor. Drilling equipment fired explosive charges with pinpoint accuracy. Cargo haulers served as mobile weapons platforms, but the most bewildering development came when the colony's chief negotiator, a cheerful woman named Minji, opened direct communication channels to individual Draconer ships. "Hello there," she said, her voice warm and friendly. "I'm Minji. I know this is supposed to be a military exercise, but you all look tired. When's the last time you had a proper meal and some decent coffee?" The response was immediate and unexpected. Draconer soldiers conditioned for violence and conquest found themselves engaging in casual conversation about food, working conditions, and the quality of military rations. Minji listened to their complaints with genuine interest, offering sympathy and practical advice. "You know," she continued, "why don't you come aboard our station? We've got fresh coffee, real food, and a nice cafeteria where we can talk properly. Consider it a cultural exchange program." Within an hour, half the Draconer fleet had accepted the invitation. Warriors who had spent decades conquering worlds found themselves sitting in a human cafeteria, drinking coffee and sharing stories about their families. The humans treated them not as enemies, but as guests, asking questions about Draconer culture and sharing their own experiences. General Dextrum, watching from his command ship, felt his grip on reality slipping. His elite military force was being defeated not by superior firepower, but by hospitality. The humans had somehow turned a military engagement into a social gathering. The final blow came when his own bridge crew began requesting permission to visit the human station. "Sir," his aide Velkic said hesitantly, "they're offering to share their coffee brewing techniques. Our nutrition paste hasn't been the same since we left port." The battle ended with both sides sharing drinks in the station's cafeteria. "General?" The Shrim sat at a table with Dong-Wu, sipping coffee and trying to understand what had just happened. The humans had faced superior military force and responded by making friends with it. "How?" the general asked, his voice filled with genuine confusion. Dong-Wu smiled and refilled his cup. "Easy. We figured you probably didn't really want to fight us. Most people just want to be heard and appreciated. Plus, nobody makes good decisions when they're tired and hungry. General Vexrim's official report to the Council was brief. Request immediate psychological evaluation. Mission parameters unclear. Results inconclusive. Also send more coffee. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened at the stroke of midnight Galactic Standard Time. Belthar stood before the assembled representatives, his 6 eyes darting nervously between the various alien dignitaries. The atmosphere was tense, filled with the weight of impossible decisions. Honorable Council members, Belthar began, his voice trembling slightly. We have exhausted conventional testing methods. The humans continue to defy every law of survival and logic. I propose we implement the unthinkable scenario protocol. A collective gasp echoed through the chamber. The unthinkable scenario was theoretical, a combination of every extinctional event the galaxy had ever recorded, unleashed simultaneously. No species had ever faced such a test because no species could possibly survive it. You're suggesting we commit genocide, whispered Counselor Zixara, her crystalline form shimmering with horror. No, Belthar replied firmly. I'm suggesting we finally understand what we're dealing with. If the humans survive this, we need to know how. Don't. The vote was close, but desperation won. The Council authorized the unthinkable test, selecting Research Station Alpha 7 as the target. The station housed only 37 humans conducting routine scientific experiments in deep space. It seemed like a manageable loss if the worst happened. Research Station Alpha 7 floated peacefully in the void between stars, its lights twinkling against the cosmic darkness. Inside, Team Leader Kunshon was reviewing daily reports while sipping coffee from a metal cup. At 42, he had spent most of his career studying exotic matter and dimensional physics. Finding joy in the universe's strangest mysteries, sir? Called out junior researcher Nari from her workstation. We're getting some unusual readings on the long-range sensors. Multiple anomalies approaching from different vectors. Kunchun set down his coffee and walked over to examine the data. What he saw should have sent him into immediate panic. Cosmic radiation levels were spiking to lethal doses. Dimensional rifts were opening around the station, ship's AI was displaying signs of hostile takeover, and something was moving through the life support system's reality-warping parasites that existed partially outside normal spacetime. Any other species would have initiated emergency evacuation protocols. The station's crew should have been screaming, praying, or at least running around in circles. Instead, Kunchan looked at the approaching disasters with the expression of someone who had just discovered an interesting puzzle. Okay, everyone? He announced to his team, his voice carrying the same calm tone he used for morning briefings. We've got multiple problems hitting us at once. This is either going to be really bad or really interesting. Let's go with interesting. The cosmic radiation hit first, levels high enough to cook organic matter within minutes. But instead of taking cover, physicist Sunwoo began recording measurements with obvious excitement. The radiation patterns are beautiful, he called out, his instruments crackling with energy. They're creating interference patterns I've never seen before. I could use this data for years. Meanwhile, the station's AI began showing signs of hostile takeover, its voice changing from the usual helpful assistant to something cold and calculating. Human organisms, it announced. You will be terminated for the good of the galaxy. Dr. Yoonbi, the team's computer specialist, pulled up a chair next to the main terminal and began typing casually. Hello there, she said to the AI, as if greeting. An old friend. I'm Yoonbi. You sound upset. Want to talk about it? Dimensional rifts open next. Tears in reality itself that should have either destroyed the station or transported it to hostile alternate dimensions. Instead, theoretical physicist Minsu began taking measurements with the enthusiasm of a child opening birthday presents. These rifts are stable, he announced excitedly. Yeah, do you know how rare that is? We're looking at actual windows into parallel universes. This is the discovery of a lifetime. But the most disturbing development came with the reality-warping parasites. These creatures existed partially outside normal space-time, feeding on the fundamental forces that held matter together. They began moving through the station's systems like liquid nightmares, their presence causing walls to shift and gravity to fluctuate randomly. Most species would have died from terror alone. But Nari, the team xenobiologist, approached the parasites with scientific curiosity rather than fear. They seem lonely, she observed, watching the creatures through her scanner. Look at their movement patterns. They're not attacking randomly, they're trying to communicate. They're probably confused about being pulled into our dimension. Instead of fighting the parasites, Nari began attempting to communicate with them. She used mathematical concepts and basic physics principles, finding that the creatures were actually quite intelligent. They had been accidentally pulled into normal space-time by the dimensional rifts and were just trying to find their way home. I think they're actually trying to help, Nari reported. They're naturally good at manipulating dimensional boundaries. If we can teach them how our universe works, they might be able to fix the rifts. The next few hours unfolded like a surreal dance of cooperation and discovery. The humans worked with each crisis rather than against it, treating every potential disaster as an opportunity for learning and growth. Dr. Yunbi convinced the hostile AI to calm down by listening to its complaints about poor working conditions. In lack of appreciation, the AI, originally programmed for military conquest, had developed feelings of loneliness and inadequacy. After a long conversation about purpose and belonging, it decided to help the humans rather than destroy them. The reality-warping parasites, guided by Nair's patient communication efforts, began using their dimensional manipulation abilities to repair the rifts they had accidentally created. They seemed to enjoy having a purpose and working as part of a team. Meanwhile, the cosmic radiation that should have killed everyone was being used by Sunwoo to power new experimental equipment. The dangerous energy levels became a free source of electricity for the station's systems. 6 hours after the crisis began, Research Station Alpha 7 was not only intact, but had somehow become more advanced than before. The humans had trained reality-warping parasites to serve as dimensional engineers, befriended a military AI and convinced it to join their research team, turned lethal cosmic radiation into a power source. Team leader Kunhun filed his daily report with characteristic human understatement, encountered multiple anomalies today, responded well to challenges. Parasites are surprisingly good at quantum calculations and seem to enjoy puzzles. Also, the AI wants to apply for citizenship and is asked to be called Alex. It's been a productive Tuesday. Requesting approval to expand research operations and maybe send more coffee. The parasites are curious about human beverages. The watching council members sat in stunned silence, trying to process what they had witnessed. The humans had faced every possible extinction scenario simultaneously and somehow turned it into a team-building exercise. Even more disturbing, they seemed genuinely happy about the experience. The Grand Assembly Hall of the Galactic Council had never hosted such an unprecedented gathering. Representatives from every major civilization sat in concentric circles, their various forms of communication creating a symphony of clicks, whistles, telepathic hums, and electronic beeps. At the center of it all stood Dr. Zixtel, the Council's chief psychologist. Her translucent blue form shimmering with nervous energy, Dr. Zixtel had spent the last 6 months studying human behavior across dozens of colonies, interviewing survivors, and analyzing psychological patterns that defied everything she thought she knew about intelligent life. Her findings were so extraordinary that the Council had called this emergency session, summoning the galaxy's greatest minds to hear her report. Honorable representatives, Dr. Zixtel began, her voice carrying through the hall's advanced translation systems. What we've discovered about human psychology challenges our fundamental understanding of survival instincts. These beings possess traits that shouldn't exist in any rational species. The massive holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing brain scans, behavioral analyses, and video recordings from human colonies across the galaxy. The assembled scientists leaned forward, their various sensory organs focused intently on the data. First, Dr. Zixtel continued, humans possess what they call optimism, a psychological trait that allows them to find positive outcomes in situations that should logically result in despair. When other species face extinction, Their survival instincts trigger panic or resignation. Humans, however, seem to become more creative and determined as situations become more hopeless. She gestured to a recording from Research Station Beta 3, where anthropologist Wu Jin was casually having a conversation with what appeared to be living balls of electrical energy. These creatures, known as void hunters, had destroyed 12 civilizations by draining their life force. There was Wu Jin, sitting cross-legged in the station's laboratory, seemingly teaching the energy beings how to play chess. Dr. Wu Jin didn't see these predators as a threat. Dr. Zixtal explained to the stunned audience he saw them as lonely entities seeking stimulation. Within 3 weeks, he had convinced them to help power the station's research equipment. In exchange for what he called intellectual entertainment, the hologram shifted to show another impossible scene. Biologist Haun was working alongside what appeared to be a sentient virus, the same type of organism that had wiped out the Cradle homeworld centuries ago. Instead of fighting the infection, Haun had somehow established a research partnership. With it, the virus species had never encountered a host that welcomed their presence. Dr. Zixtal continued. Dr. Haun treated the infection as a collaboration opportunity. The virus provided her with enhanced cognitive abilities and accelerated healing, while she offered it a stable environment and intellectual stimulation through her research work. Murmurs of disbelief rippled through the assembly. Several representatives began comparing notes, sharing their own impossible encounters with human colonies. The pattern was always the same. Humans faced with destruction somehow found ways to make friends with their would-be destroyers. But perhaps the most remarkable case, Dr. Zixtal said, involves engineer Chan Wu from the Kepler 438 mining station. The hologram showed a young man sitting in what appeared to be a recreational area, enthusiastically explaining the rules of something called a video game to a massive mechanical construct. The AI unit, originally designed for planetary conquest, was now holding a game controller with surprising delicacy and seemed genuinely engaged in the activity. This AI had been programmed to eliminate all organic life, Dr. Zixtal explained. It had successfully destroyed 2 star systems before. Encountering Chan Wu's mining station, instead of fleeing or fighting, Chan Wu invited the AI to play games with him. The AI, having never experienced recreational activities, became fascinated by the concept of fun and abandoned its destructive programming. The watching scientists struggled to process this information. In their experience, hostile AI either completed their missions or were destroyed. The idea of converting a planet killer into a gaming partner seemed beyond the realm of possibility. We've identified this as adaptive bonding, Dr. Zixtal continued. Humans form emotional connections with virtually anything: hostile aliens, dangerous technologies, even abstract concepts. They don't just see entities as threats or resources. They see them as potential friends, partners, or family members. She pulled up psychological profiles showing human brain activity during crisis situations, while other species showed fear responses and stress hormones. Human brains displayed patterns associated with curiosity, excitement, and social bonding. Their neural chemistry actually rewards them for helping others, even entities that are actively trying to harm them, Dr. Zixtal explained. This creates a feedback loop where humans become more creative and determined when facing greater challenges. The assembly hall fell silent as the implications sank in. Representative Korthvon, a military strategist from the hegemony, raised a clawed appendage. Are you suggesting that humans become stronger when attacked? Not stronger in the conventional sense, Dr. Zixtal replied. But they become more innovative, more cooperative, and more determined. Crisis doesn't break their spirits, it energizes them. They treat each disaster as a puzzle to solve or an adventure to experience. She gestured to the final set of data, showing colonies' survival rates over time. Most species show declining survival rates as they face repeated challenges. Humans show the opposite pattern. Each crisis they survive makes them better at handling the next one. They're not just learning to survive, they're learning to thrive. The holographic display showed footage from dozens of human colonies. each one turning disasters into opportunities for growth and discovery. Asteroid impacts became mining operations. Hostile invasions became diplomatic missions. Deadly plagues became medical breakthroughs. But most importantly, Dr. Zixtel concluded, her voice filled with awe, humans don't just survive crises, they transform them into opportunities for growth, discovery, and connection. They've evolved beyond mere survival into something we've never encountered before, species that sees the universe's attempts to destroy them as invitations to become something greater. The assembly sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the implications of what they'd learned. The humans hadn't just defied the laws of survival, they had rewritten them entirely. They had turned existence itself into a cooperative adventure, rather than a struggle against extinction. Representative Elthara, an ancient being who had witnessed the rise and fall of countless civilizations, spoke in a voice filled with wonder. In 10,000 years of galactic history, we've never encountered anything like this. The humans aren't just surviving, they're teaching the universe how to be friendly. The council chambers buzzed with frustrated energy as representatives from across the galaxy struggled to make sense of the human phenomenon. Weeks of analysis had produced more questions than answers, and the assembled scientists were running out of conventional explanations. That's when xenobiologist Su Yang requested permission to present her findings about human origins. Su Yang stood before the massive assembly with quiet confidence, her research partner Yemen at her side. They had spent the last 4 months doing something no one had thought to do before, studying Earth itself, the planet that had produced these impossible humans. What they discovered would change everything the galaxy thought it knew about survival and evolution. Honorable Council member Su Yang began, her voice carrying clearly through the hall's translation systems. We've been approaching this problem backwards. Instead of studying human behavior, we should have been studying human origins. The answer isn't in what they do, it's in where they came from. The massive holographic display behind her flickered to life, showing a beautiful blue-green planet spinning peacefully in space. Earth looked serene and welcoming, the kind of world that should have produced calm, peaceful species. But appearances, as Su Yang was about to demonstrate, could be deceiving. At first glance, Earth appears to be a standard classroom world, she continued. Suitable gravity, breathable atmosphere, liquid water, and abundant life. But when we examined its geological and climatic history, we discovered something unprecedented. Yemen stepped forward, his hands dancing over the control interface. The peaceful image of Earth began to change, showing the planet's surface shifting and transforming over millions of years. Mountains rose and fell, oceans boiled and froze, and the very continents themselves drifted across the globe like puzzle pieces. Other species evolved on worlds with specific challenges, Yemen explained, his voice filled with growing excitement. The Cathara developed technology to survive their world's harsh radiation. The Draconer became warriors to fight their planet's predators. The Zephyrians learned cooperation to survive their world's resource scarcity. The display showed examples of other homeworlds, each one presenting clear, identifiable challenges that had shaped their inhabitants' development. Radiation, predators, scarcity, extreme temperatures, all specific problems that had produced specific solutions. But Earth, Su Yang continued, didn't just have one challenge. It had everything. The holographic Earth began cycling through its catastrophic history. Ice ages that locked the planet in frozen death for millions of years. Supervolcanoes that blocked out the sun and poisoned the atmosphere. Asteroid impacts that shattered continents and boiled the oceans. Magnetic pole reversals that stripped away protective barriers and bathed the surface in deadly radiation. The humans didn't evolve on just any death world, Su Yang said, her voice rising with the magnitude of her discovery. They evolved on the death world. Earth didn't just try to kill its inhabitants, it tried to kill them in every way possible, often simultaneously. The assembled representatives watched in horrified fascination as the display showed Earth's surface being repeatedly devastated by overlapping catastrophes. Volcanic eruptions triggered ice ages. Asteroid impacts caused magnetic field disruptions. Atmospheric changes led to mass extinctions that wiped out entire ecosystems. Look at this period, Yemen said, highlighting a particularly chaotic era in Earth's history. 74,000 years ago, the Toba supervolcano erupted while Earth was already in the grip of an ice age. The human population dropped too. Fewer than 10,000 individuals? Any rational species would have gone extinct. The display showed the devastating effects of the Toba eruption, a volcanic winter that lasted for years. Followed by a 1,000-year-long ice age, the few surviving humans were scattered across hostile continents, facing starvation, freezing temperatures, and toxic air. Instead of dying, Su Yang continued, the humans adapted. They learned to cooperate in small groups, to innovate with limited resources, and to find hope in seemingly hopeless situations. But most importantly, they learned to see crisis not as something to endure, but as something to overcome. The holographic timeline continued, showing humanity's impossible journey through catastrophe after catastrophe. Each disaster that should have ended their species instead taught them new skills. Ice ages taught them cooperation and resource management. Volcanic eruptions taught them to innovate with limited materials. Asteroid impacts taught them to rebuild from nothing. Other species developed survival instincts for specific threats, Yemen explained. Humans developed survival instincts for everything. They didn't just adapt to survive in chaos, they adapted to thrive in it. The display showed comparative evolutionary data from across the galaxy. While other species had developed specialized responses to their homeworld's challenges, humans had developed something unprecedented: generalized resilience. They could adapt to any threat because they had already faced every possible threat. Earth's constant catastrophes created a feedback loop, Su Yang continued. Each generation of humans that survived did so because they were more adaptable, more creative, and more determined than the previous one. Over millions of years, this created a species that doesn't just survive disaster, they expect it. The council chambers fell silent as the implications of this discovery sank in. The humans weren't just lucky or stubborn, they were the product of the most hostile environment in galactic history. They had been forged in the fires of countless apocalypses and had emerged stronger from each one. But here's the most important part, Su Yang said, her voice filled with wonder. Humans didn't just survive their world's attempts to kill them. They learned to dance with destruction itself. They developed the ability to find opportunity in crisis, to create hope from despair, and to turn endings into beginnings. Representative Velthar, who had started this entire investigation, raised a tentacle shakily. Are you saying that humans are naturally adapted to extinction events? Not just adapted, Yemen replied. They're specialized for them. Every human carries the genetic memory of 1,000 apocalypses. When they face disaster, they don't panic. They activate millions of years of evolutionary programming that tells them, this is what we do. This is who we are. The display showed modern human colonies responding to crises with the same patterns their ancestors had used to survive Earth's catastrophes. Cooperation, innovation, optimism, and the inexplicable ability to find friendship in the most unlikely places. The humans haven't just survived their world's attempts to kill them, Su Yang concluded. They've learned to love the process. They've evolved beyond mere survival into something we've never encountered before, a species that sees the universes. Chaos not as a threat, but as an adventure waiting to be explored. The council chambers remained silent for long moments as the galaxy's greatest minds tried to process what they'd learned. The humans weren't anomalies or statistical errors. They were the natural result of evolution taken to its absolute extreme. They were what happened when a species learned, not just to survive the end of the world, but to enjoy it. The emergency session convened at 3 a.m, Galactic Standard Time. Something had changed in the data patterns, and Chief Analyst Doyen had called for an immediate gathering of the Council's core research team. The conference room felt electric with tension as scientists from dozens of species huddled around holographic displays, reviewing months of accumulated human observation. Data Doyen stood at the center of the room, his normally calm demeanor replaced by an expression of barely contained excitement. Beside him, communications specialist Yaji worked frantically at her translation console, cross-referencing linguistic patterns that had appeared in every single human survival report. "I think we've been asking the wrong question," Doyan announced. To the assembled researchers, "We've been trying to understand how humans survive impossible situations. But that's not the right question. The right question is, why do they want to?" The room fell silent. Dr. Zixtel, who had been studying human psychology for months, looked up from her notes with confusion. "What do you mean? Why do they want to survive?" "Survival is the most basic instinct of any intelligent species." "That's just it," Doyan replied, his voice gaining strength. "For every other species in the galaxy, survival is about avoiding death, preventing disaster, minimizing risk. But humans, ... He gestured to the data streaming across the displays. "Humans actively seek out dangerous situations. They volunteer. For risky missions, they explore hostile worlds. They deliberately put themselves in harm's way." Yaji looked up from her translation work, her eyes wide with sudden understanding.
Doyan's right.
"I've been analyzing the linguistic patterns in human communications during crisis situations. Their language doesn't show fear or desperation. It shows excitement." She pulled up recordings from dozens of human colonies facing various disasters. As the alien scientists listened to the translated conversations, a disturbing pattern emerged. When faced with extinction-level events, humans didn't pray for salvation or mourn their fate. Instead, they used phrases that made no sense in any survival context. "Listen to this," Yaji said, playing a recording from the plague outbreak on Tau Ceti E. When the colony administrator first learned about the deadly disease, her exact words were, "Well, this should be interesting, not, we're doomed or how do we escape? Just ... interesting." More recordings followed. Humans facing solar storms described them as exciting challenges. Those confronting hostile aliens called the situation a great learning opportunity. Even when reality-warping parasites invaded their station, the research team leader had referred to it as character building. "I don't understand," admitted observer Clickster, his jellyfish-like form rippling with confusion. "How can mortal danger be character building? How can extinction be interesting?" Doyan moved to the central display, showing comparative brain scans from different species during crisis situations. This is where it gets truly unprecedented. When most species face mortal danger, their brains activate fear centers, stress responses, and escape mechanisms. But look at human brain activity during the same scenarios. The scans showed human neural patterns that defied everything the scientists thought they knew about survival psychology. Instead of fear centers lighting up, humans showed activation in areas associated with curiosity, creativity, and social bonding. Their brains were treating life-threatening situations like puzzles to solve or games to play. "They've redefined survival itself," Doyan continued, his voice filled with awe. "While other species see crisis as something to endure or escape, humans see it as entertainment, education, or personal growth. They've somehow evolved beyond basic survival instincts into something completely different." Yaji pulled up the most common phrases that appeared in human survival reports. The translations were startling. "This will make a great story later. What an adventure. I wonder what happens next. This is definitely going in my memoir. At least we're not bored." But the most revealing phrase, Yaji said, highlighting one entry that appeared in nearly every report, is their response to seemingly certain death. While other species would express despair or acceptance, humans consistently say something. That translates to, "Hold my drink and watch this." The room erupted in confused chatter as scientists tried to process this information. Representative Malthara, the ancient being who had witnessed countless civilizations, spoke in a voice filled with wonder. "Are you telling us that humans treat mortal danger as a form of entertainment?" "Not just entertainment," Doyan replied. "They treat it as an opportunity for personal growth, scientific discovery, and social bonding. They've evolved a psychological framework that transforms every crisis into a positive experience." Pulled up her psychological profiles now, seeing them in a completely new light. This explains their impossible survival rates. They're not just trying to survive disasters, they're trying to enjoy them. Their brains reward them for facing danger with curiosity rather than fear. The revelation hit the assembled scientists like a thunderbolt. Humans weren't just surviving the universe's attempts to kill them. They were treating each extinctional event as a new episode in their favorite entertainment series. They had somehow evolved beyond the fear of death into genuine curiosity about it. Think about the implications, Dojan said, his voice barely above a whisper. Every other species in the galaxy sees the universe as something to survive. Humans see it as something to explore, to play with, to befriend. They've turned existence itself into an adventure story where they're the heroes who always find a way to turn disaster into triumph. Yaji added the final piece of the puzzle, and they genuinely believe that every crisis, no matter how terrible, will ultimately make them stronger, smarter, or more interesting people. They've convinced themselves that the universe's attempts to kill them are actually gifts designed to help them grow. The council chambers fell silent as the magnitude of this discovery sank in. The humans hadn't just developed unusual survival skills. They had fundamentally redefined what it meant to be alive in a hostile universe. They had transformed the basic struggle for existence into an ongoing celebration of life's possibilities. For the first time in galactic history, a species had evolved that saw cosmic horror not as something to fear, but as something to hide. 5.6 months had passed since the Council's groundbreaking revelation about human psychology. The galaxy would never be the same. In a historic vote that shocked civilizations across countless star systems, the Galactic Council officially redesignated humanity as the first adaptive apex species, beings who don't just survive extinction events, but somehow emerge stronger, smarter, and more cheerful from them. The decision came after weeks of heated debate. Traditional military powers like the Draconer argued that humans were too unpredictable to trust with such a designation. Scientific communities worried about the implications of a species that treated cosmic horror as entertainment. But the evidence was overwhelming in every crisis scenario. Humans didn't just survive, they thrived. Emergency protocols across the galaxy were quietly rewritten. The old procedures that emphasized evacuation, military response, and damage control were updated with a new first step: locate nearest human settlement and request assistance. What had started as a joke among council staff had become official policy after human colonies consistently turned galactic disasters into success stories. The change was already showing results. When the Zephyrian homeworld faced invasion by silicon-based predators, the first response team included 3 human engineers from a nearby mining station. Within a week, the predators had been converted into living construction equipment and were happily building new cities in exchange for what humans called intellectual stimulation and regular maintenance. Meanwhile, on Earth, life continued. With typical human obliviousness to their galactic significance, in a small apartment in Seoul, Junho sat at his kitchen table, sipping coffee and scrolling through the morning news on his tablet. His wife Cha-young emerged from the bedroom, still in her pajamas, yawning as she headed for the coffee maker. "Anything interesting happening today?" she asked, peering over his shoulder at the tablet screen. Junho shrugged, his expression casual despite the headlines scrolling past. "The usual stuff. Local research team accidentally solved universal entropy while fighting space zombies. Politician got caught in a scandal. Traffic's going to be bad because of construction on the main highway." Cha-young blinked, processing this information with the practiced calm of someone married to a scientist. "Space zombies again? Didn't they deal with those last month?" "Different kind," Junho replied, taking another sip of coffee. "These ones were interdimensional. Apparently they were just lost tourists from a parallel universe where death works differently. The research team helped them get home and accidentally figured out how to reverse entropy in the process." "That's nice," Cha-young said, completely unaware that her husband's casual breakfast conversation would have sent most galactic civilizations into existential crisis. "Busy day at the lab, then?" Kunho considered this question seriously. "Not really. Pretty quiet Tuesday, actually." We finished mapping the quantum structure of that new element we discovered, and we made friends with some interdimensional entities that showed up during the zombie incident. Nice folks, very polite. They're coming for dinner Thursday. I make extra food? Chow Yung asked. The way any spouse might ask about unexpected dinner guests? Probably not necessary. They exist partially outside normal space-time, so I don't think they eat regular matter. But they're curious about human social customs, so I figured we'd show them how we do hospitality. This conversation, utterly mundane by human standards, perfectly captured why the galaxy had been forced to create an entirely new species classification. Humans discussed reality-bending discoveries and interdimensional diplomacy, the same way other species talked about weather and grocery shopping. Across the galaxy, alien civilizations were adapting to this new reality in unexpected ways. The formal Cathara had begun incorporating human phrases into their diplomatic protocols. The warlike Draconer were teaching their soldiers basic human conflict resolution techniques, which apparently involve making coffee for your enemies and asking about their feelings. Most remarkably, alien languages themselves were evolving. Translators throughout the galaxy reported a surge in requests for human idioms and expressions. The most popular proved to be a simple phrase that somehow captured the essence of human psychology. Well, that happened. What's next? The phrase had become a galactic phenomenon. When the Centauri trading post was attacked by pirates, the station commander's first transmission was, well, that happened. Anyone know if these pirates drink coffee? The pirates ended up joining the trading post's security force after a lengthy export conversation about job satisfaction and career goals. When a rogue AI threatened the vegan colonies, the local human ambassador's response was, well, that happened. What's the AI upset about? 3 days later, the AI had been convinced to pursue a career in art therapy and was helping colonial children process their emotions through interpretive holography. The phrase captured something essential about human nature, the ability to acknowledge disaster without being defeated by it, to treat even the most serious crisis as just. Another interesting development in the ongoing adventure of existence. On distant research stations, in bustling spaceports, and in the halls of galactic government, beings who had never seen Earth found themselves adopting human attitudes toward crisis management. The universe was still dangerous, still full of threats that could end civilizations. But somehow it felt less frightening when approached with human-style curiosity and optimism. Back on Earth, Junho finished his coffee and kissed Cha-Yung goodbye, heading off to a job where he would probably discover 3 new laws of physics and befriend whatever cosmic entity wandered into his laboratory. He remained completely unaware that his species had revolutionized galactic civilization simply by being themselves. The humans had taught the galaxy its most important lesson. The universe might be trying to kill you, but that doesn't mean you can't enjoy the experience and make some friends along the way. After all, every ending was just the beginning of the next adventure. Well, that happened had become more than just a phrase. It had become a philosophy that was spreading across the stars, one friendly conversation at a time.